British princesses are getting swept up in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Beatrice and Eugenie are the daughters of former Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson.
Just when the royal family believed the Jeffrey Epstein scandal had finally faded from headlines, a new shockwave has emerged. Sources claim that questions raised by international investigators have unexpectedly pulled Princess Eugenie into the conversation. And as alleged victims begin speaking again, the quiet York princess now finds herself at the center of a controversy the palace hoped was long buried. The question that reopened the Epstein shadow. For years, the British royal family has tried to distance itself from the scandal surrounding the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. The damage to the monarchy's reputation became painfully clear after the explosive revelations surrounding Prince Andrew, whose friendship with Epstein triggered one of the most severe crises the House of Windsor has faced in decades. But just when many believed the story had finally settled into history, new whispers have begun circulating, and this time the spotlight is drifting toward Princess Eugenie. According to reports circulating among royal watchers and investigative journalists, renewed interest from international investigators has revived questions about the wider social network connected to Epstein during the years when his influence reached into elite circles across the United States and Europe. And while no formal accusations have been publicly confirmed, the mere suggestion that investigators are asking questions about members of the extended royal family has once again placed the monarchy in an uncomfortable position. To understand why this moment is causing such alarm inside palace circles, it helps to remember how deeply the Epstein affair shook the institution just a few years ago. When Prince Andrew's ties to Epstein first surfaced publicly, Buckingham Palace attempted to manage the fallout quietly. But the crisis escalated dramatically after Andrew's now infamous television interview in 2019. The appearance, intended to clear his name, instead intensified scrutiny and led to his withdrawal from official royal duties. Since then, the monarchy has worked carefully to rebuild its public image. And that effort has included a deliberate shift in how the royal family presents itself to the world. Senior working royals, King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, have increasingly become the visible face of the institution. Meanwhile, extended family members connected to past controversies have quietly stepped back from the spotlight. That shift became particularly visible in early 2026 during preparations for one of Britain's most famous royal events, Royal Ascot. Palace insiders confirmed that both Princess Eugenie and her sister Princess Beatrice would not be appearing in the royal procession or sitting in the royal box that year, something that had not happened simultaneously for more than a decade. The official explanation was carefully worded. There was no direct statement from Buckingham Palace, only quiet confirmation that the decision reflected a broader strategy to focus public attention on the core working members of the royal family. Pasted text. On the surface, the change appeared procedural, a routine recalibration of royal appearances. But among royal observers, the move sparked immediate speculation. Why would two well-known royal figures suddenly disappear from such a visible event? Royal Ascot is not just another social gathering. For centuries it has been one of the monarchy's most symbolic public displays, an event where the king, senior royals, and international guests appear together in a carefully choreographed show of continuity and prestige. Each afternoon during the 5-day meeting, royal carriages travel down the famous Ascot Straight in a procession watched by millions around the world. The event is widely viewed as a demonstration of unity within the royal family. So when Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice were quietly removed from that lineup, the absence did not go unnoticed. Palace sources described the decision as a way to ensure that the event remained centered on the monarchy's most active representatives. In other words, fewer distractions. But critics and commentators immediately connected the decision to the lingering shadow cast by the Epstein scandal. Because despite years passing since the original revelations, the controversy surrounding Prince Andrew never fully disappeared. And in the digital age, stories tied to Epstein have an uncanny tendency to resurface without warning. That is precisely what appears to be happening now. According to insiders familiar with the situation, investigators reviewing older Epstein-related financial records and communications have reportedly been examining the broader social networks connected to the financier during the height of his influence. Again, it is important to stress that no formal allegations have been publicly confirmed against Princess Eugenie. But even the suggestion that investigators have asked questions about individuals within that network is enough to create anxiety within royal circles. The reason is simple. The monarchy has spent years trying to turn the page on the Epstein saga. And every time the story resurfaces, it risks reopening a reputational wound that the palace would much rather keep closed. For Princess Eugenie, the situation is particularly delicate. Unlike her father, she has largely avoided major controversies throughout her public life. Known for her charitable work and comparatively low-profile royal role, Eugenie has often been seen as one of the more relatable members of the extended royal family. Yet the reality of royal life is that family connections can be impossible to escape. And when investigators begin revisiting events tied to the Epstein network, no matter how indirectly, the ripple effects can quickly spread across the entire House of Windsor. Behind palace walls, advisors are said to be watching the situation closely. Because history has already shown how quickly a royal scandal can spiral once public scrutiny intensifies. The monarchy's modern strategy has been clear: maintain a streamlined group of trusted working royals and avoid unnecessary controversies that could overshadow the institution's message of stability and duty. But as the Epstein story unexpectedly begins to stir again, that strategy may soon face its most uncomfortable test yet. And according to some insiders, what investigators are asking now could be only the beginning. Because the real shock may come when voices connected to Epstein's past start speaking again, and when alleged victims decide it is time to revisit stories many believed had already been told. The York connection investigators refused to ignore. The renewed scrutiny surrounding Princess Eugenie did not emerge in isolation. Instead, it appears tied to a much larger effort by investigators to re-examine the network of individuals who once moved within the orbit of Jeffrey Epstein during the height of his global influence. For years, Epstein cultivated relationships with politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and members of powerful families across multiple continents. His wealth, combined with his reputation as a mysterious financial strategist, gave him unusual access to elite circles that rarely intersected with criminal investigations. That access became one of the most troubling aspects of the entire scandal. Because when Epstein's crimes were exposed, the world quickly realized that his social connections stretched far beyond the usual boundaries of business and finance. High-profile names began appearing in court documents, flight logs, and witness testimony. Among those names, none created a greater storm inside Britain than Prince Andrew. Andrew's friendship with Epstein became one of the most damaging controversies the British monarchy had faced in generations. Photos showing the prince walking with Epstein in New York after the financier had already served time for sex-related offenses raised serious questions about judgment and accountability. But the real turning point came when one of Epstein's most prominent accusers, Virginia Giuffre, publicly alleged that she had been trafficked to Prince Andrew as a teenager. Andrew denied the claims repeatedly. Yet the controversy only intensified as legal battles unfolded in the United States. Ultimately, the dispute ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement, though the prince never admitted wrongdoing. The consequences for the royal family were immediate and severe. Prince Andrew stepped back from public duties. Military titles and royal patronages were removed. His role inside the monarchy effectively disappeared overnight. For the House of Windsor, the strategy became clear: distance the institution from the scandal as quickly as possible. But distancing the monarchy from Andrew was never entirely simple. Because Andrew is not just another royal. He is the father of Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice. And for years, the two sisters had remained visible members of royal society, attending major national events, appearing at public ceremonies, and representing a younger generation of the extended royal family. Unlike their father, both women largely avoided direct controversy. They pursued careers outside traditional royal duties and maintained public reputations focused on charity, business, and family life. That image helped shield them from much of the backlash directed at Andrew. But as investigators continue revisiting Epstein's network, the York family name inevitably resurfaces. And that alone is enough to trigger renewed scrutiny. Royal analysts say this is precisely why the palace has become increasingly cautious about which members of the extended family appear at major public events. The shift became especially noticeable as King Charles III began reshaping the public image of the monarchy after ascending the throne. Charles has long favored a slimmed-down monarchy, a smaller group of senior working royals representing the institution. The goal is to reduce controversy, focus public attention on a few trusted figures, and modernize how the royal family operates. Under that approach, the central public faces of the monarchy are now widely understood to be a King Charles III, a Queen Camilla, a Prince William, a Catherine, Princess of Wales, Princess, and a Prince Edward. Other royals may still attend events occasionally, but the institution's messaging is now carefully controlled. And in a media environment where every appearance is analyzed, even small decisions about who sits in the royal box or rides in a carriage can carry symbolic weight. That brings us back to the unusual development that first sparked speculation: the absence of Eugenie and Beatrice from Royal Ascot in 2026. Royal Ascot is not simply a sporting event. It is one of the monarchy's most visible displays of tradition and prestige, broadcast internationally and watched by millions. Each afternoon during the meeting, the royal procession moves down the racecourse in open carriages, a tradition dating back more than 2 centuries. Historically, members of the extended royal family often participated in that procession. But in 2026, the lineup was noticeably smaller. The royal carriages carried only the monarch, the immediate heirs, and a few senior working royals. Additional carriages for extended family members were removed from the schedule. Palace insiders described the move as part of a broader strategy to streamline royal appearances and protect the institution's image. The absence of the York sisters was particularly striking because both had attended Ascot regularly for years. To royal observers, the message was subtle but unmistakable. The monarchy was drawing clearer lines between working royals and extended relatives. At the same time, journalists began noticing renewed online discussion about the Epstein network, discussions fueled by documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports continuing to explore the financier's past relationships. And when that conversation returned, the York connection inevitably returned with it. That is the uncomfortable reality facing Princess Eugenie now. Even if investigators are simply reviewing historical records or mapping Epstein's broader network of acquaintances, the ripple effects reach anyone connected to individuals previously linked to the scandal. Inside royal circles, the concern is not necessarily about legal exposure. It is about perception. Because in modern media culture, perception often shapes reality. A single headline suggesting that investigators are asking questions can spread globally within minutes, regardless of whether any formal accusations exist. And once that narrative takes hold, it becomes extraordinarily difficult for institutions like the monarchy to control. For Eugenie, the situation places her in an extremely delicate position. She has spent years building a public identity separate from her father's controversies, focusing on charitable work, environmental initiatives, and raising her young family largely outside the royal spotlight. Yet the legacy of the Epstein scandal continues to linger like a shadow over the York name. And if alleged victims or investigators begin revisiting stories tied to that network, the ripple effects could once again reach the royal family. Which raises a question that palace advisors are reportedly asking behind closed doors. If the Epstein story truly is reopening, how far might the investigation go this time? Because what began as a scandal centered on one disgraced financier eventually exposed a web of connections stretching across the highest levels of global society. And some observers now believe the next revelations could prove even more uncomfortable than the first. The victims who refused to stay silent. 4 years after the downfall of Jeffrey Epstein, many believed the darkest chapters of the scandal had already been exposed. Court cases had unfolded, documentaries had dissected the story, and countless investigative reports had attempted to map the web of power surrounding the disgraced financier. But in reality, the Epstein story never truly disappeared. It simply went quiet. And now, that silence appears to be breaking again. Across the United States and Europe, several alleged victims connected to Epstein's trafficking network have continued pushing for answers about the individuals who moved within his elite social circles. Many of them have spent years arguing that the full truth about Epstein's powerful connections has never been completely revealed. For these victims, the issue was never just about one man. It was about the environment that allowed him to operate for so long. Epstein did not function alone. He cultivated relationships with influential figures who attended his parties, visited his homes, traveled on his private aircraft, or maintained business and social connections with him over the years. And according to several survivors who have spoken publicly, understanding those networks remains critical to understanding how Epstein's operations continued for decades. Among the most widely known voices in that fight has been Virginia Giuffre, whose legal battle with Prince Andrew placed the British royal family directly into the global spotlight. Giuffre's accusations against Andrew, which he has always denied, triggered one of the most damaging royal scandals in modern British history. The controversy ultimately led to a legal settlement that ended the case but did little to quiet public debate about Epstein's wider connections. Even after that settlement, many victims continued to speak out. Some appeared in documentaries. Others shared their experiences in court filings or interviews with investigative journalists. Their message remained consistent. The Epstein network involved far more people than the public had yet seen held accountable. And in recent years, new lawsuits and legal proceedings tied to Epstein's former associates have kept the story alive. One of the most significant developments came during the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted in the United States for helping Epstein recruit and traffic underage girls. Maxwell had long been described as Epstein's closest confidant, the person who introduced him to powerful social circles and allegedly helped facilitate access to young victims. During her trial, prosecutors presented evidence showing how Epstein's operations depended on carefully cultivated relationships with wealthy and influential individuals. The proceedings once again reminded the world that Epstein had moved comfortably among elites for years. That reality continues to fuel public fascination and outrage, because many people still believe the full story has not been told. And every time new documents emerge or old testimony resurfaces, attention returns to the same question. Who else knew? This is where the situation becomes increasingly uncomfortable for figures connected to Epstein's social orbit, even indirectly. When investigators re-examine financial records, travel logs, or communication networks from that era, they often uncover names that appeared in Epstein's contact lists, guest records, or social calendars. Being mentioned in those records does not necessarily imply wrongdoing. But in the age of global media, even the smallest connection can ignite a wave of speculation. That is precisely why the royal family has spent years attempting to place clear distance between itself and the Epstein saga. Under the leadership of King Charles III, the monarchy has increasingly focused on a streamlined group of working royals who represent the institution publicly. Figures like Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Princess have become the visible core of the modern monarchy, individuals whose reputations remain largely free of scandal. At the same time, extended family members connected to past controversies have gradually stepped back from high-profile roles. This shift has not always been explained openly, but its pattern has been clear. Appearances at major national events have been reduced. Public engagements have been carefully curated. And the monarchy's messaging has emphasized stability, duty, and service. The goal has been simple: protect the institution's credibility. Yet the Epstein scandal presents a unique challenge, because it is not just a historical controversy. It is an ongoing story. Legal cases tied to Epstein's financial operations and trafficking network continue to unfold years after his death. Civil lawsuits are still working their way through courts. Investigative journalists continue to publish new findings, and survivors continue to demand accountability. For the monarchy, this creates a difficult balancing act. On one hand, the palace wants to avoid giving renewed attention to the Epstein story. On the other hand, it cannot fully control how the public revisits past events when new revelations emerge. This is why any suggestion that investigators are reviewing connections tied to Epstein's network instantly creates anxiety within royal circles. Even when no accusations are directed at specific individuals, the headlines alone can trigger intense scrutiny. And when that scrutiny touches members of the extended royal family, such as Princess Eugenie, the situation becomes especially delicate. Because the York branch of the royal family has already endured years of reputational damage following the controversy surrounding Prince Andrew. For Eugenie personally, the timing could hardly be worse. She has spent the past decade building a life largely outside the traditional royal spotlight, focusing on charity work, environmental initiatives, and raising her family with her husband Jack Brooksbank. Her public image has been relatively positive compared with the storms surrounding her father. But the problem with scandals tied to powerful networks is that they rarely remain confined to one individual. When investigators revisit old connections, the ripple effects can reach anyone who once moved within the same social circles. And for victims seeking justice, those networks remain a central part of the story. Many survivors argue that Epstein's influence persisted for so long precisely because of the protection offered by powerful connections. That belief continues to drive calls for deeper investigations. Which means that even years after Epstein's death, the search for answers is far from over. And if those answers begin revealing new details about the people who once surrounded him, the consequences could once again ripple through some of the most powerful institutions in the world, including the British monarchy. Because the most uncomfortable truth about the Epstein scandal may still be the one investigators have yet to fully uncover. And if more voices begin speaking out in the months ahead, the pressure to revisit old questions may only grow stronger. The Palace Strategy, containing a scandal that won't disappear. Inside royal circles, one reality has become impossible to ignore. The Epstein scandal may be years old, but its political and reputational consequences are far from finished. For the British monarchy, the crisis triggered by Prince Andrew forced a dramatic shift in how the institution manages public perception. What once seemed like a private family controversy quickly evolved into a global media storm that threatened the credibility of the entire royal brand. And the response from the palace was swift. Andrew was removed from public duties. Military roles and honorary patronages were stripped away. Official appearances stopped almost overnight. The once prominent prince who had represented Britain around the world suddenly vanished from the royal frontline. The message was clear. The monarchy would not allow the scandal to define the institution. But while removing Andrew from public life helped stabilize the situation temporarily, the deeper challenge remained: how to protect the reputation of the crown while managing the presence of other members of the extended York family. That challenge now centers increasingly on Princess Eugenie and her sister Princess Beatrice. Unlike their father, both women have largely avoided public controversy throughout their adult lives. They built careers outside traditional royal roles and were often seen as modern members of the royal family who balanced private work with occasional public appearances. For years, that balance worked. But the Epstein scandal changed everything. Once the controversy surrounding Andrew exploded into global headlines, every member of the York branch of the royal family suddenly found themselves under new scrutiny. Journalists, commentators, and investigators began revisiting past events, photographs, and social connections in search of clues about how deeply Epstein's network had penetrated elite circles. Even individuals who had never been accused of wrongdoing became subjects of speculation. And in the digital age, speculation spreads fast. That is why the palace began quietly reshaping the public image of the monarchy. Under King Charles III, the institution has increasingly embraced what royal analysts call a core monarchy model, a smaller group of highly trusted working royals representing the crown. This approach focuses public attention on figures whose reputations remain largely uncontroversial. A Prince William, a Catherine, Princess of Wales, Queen Camilla, a Princess, and a Prince Edward. Together, these figures now form the visible backbone of the monarchy's public activities. The strategy is simple but effective. Limit the number of people representing the institution. Reduce the risk of unexpected scandals. Focus public attention on stability and continuity. This strategy explains many of the subtle changes royal watchers have noticed in recent years. Events once attended by large groups of extended family members are now noticeably smaller. Public ceremonies increasingly feature only the most senior working royals. Invitations to high-profile occasions are carefully controlled. One of the clearest examples of this shift came with preparations for Royal Ascot in 2026. For generations, Royal Ascot has served as one of the most visible displays of royal unity. The famous carriage procession down the racecourse is broadcast worldwide and symbolizes the continuity of the monarchy. Historically, extended members of the royal family often joined the procession. But in 2026, the event looked different. The number of royal carriages was reduced. The lineup was streamlined. And most notably, Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice were absent from both the procession and the royal box. Palace officials never issued a detailed public explanation. However, insiders described the decision as part of a broader effort to focus attention on the monarchy's core working members. To royal observers, the symbolism was unmistakable. The institution was quietly tightening its circle. Not because Eugenie or Beatrice had committed wrongdoing, but because the York family name had become inseparable from one of the most damaging scandals in modern royal history. From a communications perspective, the decision made sense. Royal events like Ascot are watched by millions of viewers around the world. Every image from the royal box circulates across global media within minutes. In that environment, even the slightest controversy can overshadow the intended message of unity and tradition. By limiting appearances to the most trusted senior royals, the palace reduces the chance of distraction. But the strategy also creates a delicate personal reality for the York sisters. They remain members of the royal family. They still carry their titles. and they continue to attend certain family gatherings and private events. Yet their public role has quietly shrunk. For Princess Eugenie, this transition represents a complicated balancing act. On one hand, she has tried to maintain a largely independent life outside the traditional structures of royal duty. Her work in the art world and charitable sector has allowed her to cultivate a professional identity separate from palace responsibilities. On the other hand, her family connection to Prince Andrew ensures that public scrutiny never fully disappears. Every time the Epstein story resurfaces, whether through court documents, investigative reports, or renewed public discussion, the York family inevitably re-enters the conversation. That is why the latest rumors about investigators revisiting Epstein's network have triggered such intense speculation. Not because specific accusations have been confirmed, but because the Epstein saga has already demonstrated how quickly a controversy can spiral once it touches powerful institutions. For the monarchy, the fear is not just legal risk. It is reputational damage. The Crown's authority relies heavily on public trust. And in the modern media environment, trust can erode rapidly when scandals dominate headlines. Which explains why palace advisors are said to be watching the situation closely. If new revelations tied to Epstein continue to surface, the monarchy may once again face difficult decisions about how to protect the institution while managing the complicated realities of family relationships. And as history has already shown, the royal family's greatest challenge is not simply surviving a scandal. It is ensuring that the scandal does not define the future of the crown. Because once public confidence begins to fracture, even centuries-old institutions can find themselves fighting to regain control of their own narrative. A royal reputation on the edge. For the British monarchy, the Epstein scandal has always been more than just a legal controversy. It has been a test of credibility. When the friendship between Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein first became a global story, the royal family faced one of the most uncomfortable questions in its modern history. How could a centuries-old institution built on honor and duty find itself entangled in a scandal involving one of the world's most notorious criminals? The damage was immediate. Public trust wavered. International headlines scrutinized every royal appearance. And for a moment, it seemed as though the reputation of the House of Windsor itself might be dragged into the crisis. The monarchy responded the only way it knew how. Distance. Prince Andrew stepped away from public duties. Official royal communications stopped referencing his work. Appearances at state events disappeared. Over time, the palace carefully attempted to shift public attention toward the figures who represented the future of the institution. At the center of that strategy were King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, the royal trio now widely seen as the modern face of the monarchy. Supporting them were trusted senior figures such as Princess Anne, whose decades of steady public service have earned respect across the political spectrum. This smaller, more focused royal lineup became the foundation of what insiders often describe as the monarchy's stability strategy. In other words, the palace has attempted to rebuild trust by emphasizing duty, continuity, and professionalism. But rebuilding trust takes time. And every time the Epstein story resurfaces, that effort becomes more complicated. Because scandals involving powerful people rarely disappear completely. They linger. They resurface. And they evolve as investigators, journalists, and survivors continue searching for answers. That is why the latest speculation involving Princess Eugenie has triggered such intense curiosity among royal watchers. It is not necessarily about legal accusations. It is about the possibility that the Epstein network, the web of relationships that once surrounded the disgraced financier, may still hold secrets that have yet to be fully revealed. For Eugenie personally, the situation places her in an extremely delicate position. Throughout her adult life, she has worked to build an identity separate from the controversy surrounding her father. Her work in the art world, her charitable initiatives, and her efforts to maintain a relatively private family life with her husband Jack Brooksbank have allowed her to cultivate a reputation that is largely independent of palace politics. Many royal observers have even described her as one of the more relatable members of the extended royal family. Yet royal history has repeatedly demonstrated a difficult truth. In a monarchy built on family lineage, no member of the royal household exists entirely in isolation. The actions of one individual often ripple through the entire institution. And when the story involves a global scandal like the Epstein case, those ripples can travel far beyond the palace walls. This is precisely why the monarchy has become increasingly cautious about how it manages the public presence of extended family members. The absence of Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice from major royal events, including Royal Ascot, has been widely interpreted as part of a broader effort to protect the institution's public image. Palace sources have described the move as a temporary recalibration rather than a permanent exclusion. But symbolism matters in royal life. When viewers around the world watch royal ceremonies, every detail is noticed. Who stands beside the king? Who rides in the royal carriage? Who appears in the royal box? And who does not? For centuries, the strength of the British monarchy has rested on its ability to project continuity. The sense that despite political change, social upheaval, and personal scandals, the institution itself remains stable. Yet maintaining that stability requires constant adaptation. Today's monarchy operates in an environment far different from the one that existed even 20 years ago. Social media spreads information instantly. Investigative journalists operate globally. And public expectations of accountability are higher than ever. In this environment, scandals tied to powerful figures can re-emerge long after they first appear resolved. And when they do, institutions like the monarchy must once again prove their resilience. For now, there is no confirmation that the latest rumors surrounding Princess Eugenie will lead to any formal developments. But the situation serves as a powerful reminder of how long the shadow of the Epstein scandal continues to stretch. Because the story was never simply about one man. It was about the network of influence that surrounded him, a network that intersected with some of the most powerful institutions in the world, including, at times, the British royal family. And as investigators, journalists, and survivors continue searching for answers, that network may yet reveal new chapters. Chapters that could once again place the House of Windsor under the harsh glare of global scrutiny. For the monarchy, the challenge remains the same as it has always been. Protect the crown, preserve public trust, and ensure that the institution endures beyond the controversies of any single generation. But in an era of relentless transparency, that task has never been more difficult. And the next revelations, if they come, could determine whether the Epstein scandal finally fades into history, or returns once again to haunt one of the world's most famous royal families. If you want to stay updated on the biggest royal controversies, hidden palace tensions, and the stories the headlines only hint at, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because in the world of royalty, the most important revelations rarely happen on the palace balcony. They happen behind closed doors.